me first just give a quick intro to all of our speakers. I know we have a lot to get through today. I hope we can get through some really interesting topics. But first, I want to introduce, we have Bosworth. I'm sure many of you recognize her. Of course, she came to fame on the iconic reality shows like Laguna Beach, but she's also the founder of Love Wellness. She founded Love Wellness in 2016. It's a supplement brand that sells products related to issues like vaginal health, hormonal balance, gut health, and many more. The brand has done more than $50 million in annual sales and continues to grow. We also have here Ava Goicochea. I'm sure many of you recognize her products. Ava is the founder of Maude. But prior to founding Maude in 2018, she was also a legislative aide in healthcare at the California Medical Association. She's also worked in branding and marketing for really pioneering brands like Everlane, which I'm sure you all know. In 2018, she founded Maude, and her products like very sleek, stylish vibrators, lubricants are now found in major retailers like Sephora and Erewhon. We also have Whitney Gellar here. Whitney is the co-founder of the modern condoms brand Jems. And back in 2020, Whitney and her friend and business partner, Yasmin Emery, found that condom branding was a really stagnant category. I'm sure many of you can picture, what we're thinking of. Condoms were really heavily marketed only to men, a lot of heteronormative branding and messaging. And so she and Yasmin really wanted to change that. And that's why they founded Jems. The Toronto-based brand is now, they sell gender-inclusive condoms and lubricants. And it's also a partner for Sex Fluent, a youth-driven resource on sexual and mental health and harm reduction from the Canadian Foundation for AIDS Research. So hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Let's go ahead and get started. I know we have a lot to cover here, but I want to start with a potentially very broad and just general question just to kick it off, which is, what is sexual wellness? How do you define sexual wellness? What does it mean for your brand? And first, I'd love to kick it off with Ava. How do you define sexual wellness?
So I think we think of sexual wellness as intimacy. We really say our tagline is modern intimacy. And we think about this, it's really at the intersection of your emotional, physical, and mental health. And we're really a brand that's meant for all people because we realize like you're having sex with other people. So for us, sexual wellness is really, it's intimacy. It's broader than just the act of sex.
Absolutely. And Whitney, I'd love to kick it off you. How do you define sexual wellness?
Yeah, I love that response. I think for us, we think about it as having fun, feeling good, feeling responsible without any of that shame and stigma. And just because of the nature of what we're doing at Gems, we think a lot about empowering people to feel confident and in charge of their wellness. And the idea being that if you feel uninhibited because you feel safe, you're going to feel more free. I think that's one of the big ways that we look at sexual wellness.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lo, over to you as well. How do you define sexual wellness?
I think in context of the Love Wellness brand, when I think about sexual wellness, it really comes down to intimate health and how our products can support women, whether it's vaginal health, whether it is hormonal health, whether it's personal hygiene. All those things play into the confidence that goes into your sex life, right? And so I think a lot of women historically have suffered silently when it comes to issues with their body. When I started my company back in 2016, I was one of the first people to get on the internet and start talking about my yeast infection, which was very embarrassing at the time. And now the conversation has been really normalized almost a decade later. And so I think for us, it's about taking care of sort of your core body parts, and that really can influence your sexual wellness in a positive way.
Absolutely. And as all of you touched on, and, as we, touched on with the name of this panel, breaking taboos, there is a lot of potential stigma and shame that comes with sexual wellness and just with the act of, purchasing a product related to sex, whether that's your sexual health or, sexual pleasure. And I'm curious, this is for all of you. Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to go first. How do your brands and products deal with that stigma? How do you help consumers overcome that potential shame that they have?
Whitney, you go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Whitney.
You're welcome to talk.
I'm happy to jump in. I know that we have a lot of design backgrounds on this panel too, but certainly the way that a product looks and feels, you know, it's designed to say something, and it makes you feel a certain way. And, you know, nowadays it's like everything, your toothpaste is designed. You're used to feeling like you have something that speaks to you and is something you want around you. And it was just during COVID, I was between pregnancies. I found myself in the condom aisle as, you know, going to be the mom of 3. And I felt so strange being there, and I felt terrible buying these products. And it was a quick phone call to my business partner to be like, have you been in this aisle lately? And what I recognized was both the confusion in the aisle leads to a lack of being able to make a decision, which is clearly a really important thing, especially for young people. You need to be able to make a decision and feel good about it. Um, and there was just so much shame. That was the most what I felt. And what we realized later was that a lot of typical condom packaging is really preying on men's insecurities and saying what they're not and trying to boost that up. And we thought, what if we could just create something that would make young people feel really good when they're in this aisle and have the opposite impact? And really, it was just done through packaging, through messaging, and then stripping out ingredients that also you don't need to be there for your bodies and add confusion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ava.
I'm trying to like go in the circle that I see, but you
I know, I'm not
next.
sure what to do. Go ahead.
You go next.
Okay, I'll go. So I think for me, I have always been a huge beauty aficionado. You know, when I was like 7 and 8, I had like Kevin Aqua books and was like recreating all his beauty looks in the bathroom and creating eyeshadow from Vaseline and other weird things. So I have this like deep love of beauty, and whenever I go to the store and I buy a lipstick, it just makes me feel so happy and joyful. And we make products for pretty embarrassing need states, I would say. We make vaginal suppositories, we make vulva cleansers, all kinds of products that really tap into, you know, these health issues. We call them shy buys because they are shy buys. And I thought to myself when I was, you know, kind of like in year 2 or 3, because at that point we were thinking about a repackaging design. Can I make a vaginal suppository that makes you feel just as good when you hold it in your hands as a lip gloss does? And so in the very early days, like design really drove kind of how we thought about the brand and how we make it a beauty adjacent brand. And we actually launched first in Ulta in 2019. And then we launched next into the natural beauty section of Target. And it was really interesting because the brand took off in these beauty sections of the store, which is a little bit ironic because, you know, they're like vaginal health products and gut health products, but it was a very early proof point for me that how a brand looks and makes a customer feel is just as important as the ingredients and the efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree. I think this idea of adjacencies that kind of inform how we think about other areas of our life are so helpful in informing how you destigmatize this. And it for us, it was when you look at this sort of fractured environment of devices, lubricants, and condoms first, and then also we have body products, you realize that they were all pretty garish and they were pretty young and they were very gendered. And that's wonderful. There's like room for all. But I think ultimately there was this really underserved audience that wanted things that were designed in a way that made them feel more secure about these purchases and sort of lent themselves to how they see the rest of their wellness and personal care. And then beyond that, I thought it was so interesting that all of these other categories, especially within beauty, borrow sex. I mean, even alcohol or cars, like they borrow sex, but no brand in sexual wellness has ever really tried to be like sexier and more intimate and more smart. And so we were like, this doesn't make any sense. Why should this be the one place where you can't actually position it in this way that is really beautiful and sensorial? So it's always been led by design. And I think that's what's actually spoken to the customer for all 3 brands.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lo, I love this term you used of like shy buys that, yeah, you can picture some people buying these supplements, condoms, loops, whatever it is, and kind of, not showing it like in the checkout aisle or being nervous. But with that in mind, I mean, sexual wellness is really growing as a market. I've seen projections that it'll reach like 60 billion by 2030. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's growing, let's say, and there's a lot more players in this space. And I'm curious for all of you again, like, why do you think it's growing despite that stigma and despite that discomfort that people feel in even buying these products?
I think it's growing because it's now encompassing many more categories, which is critically important. Obviously, women's health is underserved, it's understudied. So from where I'm sitting, like these brands are not exactly the same, but they're next to each other. And beyond that, we see other brands that are in that sphere. And so sexual health is pretty broad, but that's critical because it wasn't broad before. It wasn't how we thought about this before. You went to that aisle, you bought that condom, you bought, and it's just important for us to elbow our way into spaces so that people really do feel like this is a part of their life that they can take ownership of.
Yeah, I think through a business lens, retail partners started to take risks on sexual wellness brands, female health brands a couple of years ago, and we were guinea pigs for them to a certain degree. And once you prove yourself in a Walmart, like that is like a free billboard, right? Like if you have POS, like you're in a retail environment, like that is a billboard, and that ultimately makes consumers more comfortable. And then I think if you look at the media that we're consuming, the research gap has started to close a little bit when it comes to women's health, and a lot of people are talking about this stuff. So the media we consume is really focused on women's health, is focused on educating and trying to close that gap, right? And so I think like over the last 10 years, like women have moved forward a lot in terms of their comfort level with the subject matter and sort of their own coming to terms with the fact that these need state products can really benefit them.
Yeah, I agree a lot. I agree a lot with these comments. I just think in general that it still feels like it's a niche industry, sexual wellness, and really it's just a part of wellness. Like you wouldn't, it's like eye wellness or arm wellness. I don't know. I think sexual wellness is really, it will just become more mainstream and less stigma. And certainly what we see is that, I think millennials, I think Gen X, I think older than that, it's about, it's like, ooh, a little taboo, a little, but really young people have no stigma with this. They talk very openly. I think it's sometimes to the shock of their parents, how open they are about it. And so I think if they're leading the way forward too, it'll just naturally become more mainstream.
I also think, just to chime in on the point that you've been making earlier around health, like it's now it's up to the consumer to get health education via the aisle in a lot of ways, or via tech platforms, because it's not consistent in every state. It's not accessible in every state. So like the fact that we sit on these aisles is almost solving for the gap of education in this way, and that's why brands should exist, especially diverse brands coming from every lens of like health and sexual health.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and as you mentioned, we're talking about health in this category, and a lot of wellness products, they're talking about, of course, health, but it's sort of about feeling good. It's sort of a broader kind of result you're getting. But when we're talking about sexual wellness and health, a lot of times we're talking about really concrete health consequences for people, and products that are dealing with serious issues like preventing pregnancy, preventing or treating infections. And I want to hear from all of you, what, especially given that this category is growing, there's more commercial interest here, people seeing the opportunity. I want to hear, how do you ensure the safety and efficacy of your products?
Sure. Whitney, you want to go first?
I'm happy to. I mean, I think everybody in this panel will know, but we obviously deal with a lot of like class 2 medical devices as well, which are already so heavily regulated. Something I know when we talked to young people when we were first kind of thinking up what Jems would be, was that they didn't know that condoms are a class 2 medical device. So they're looking like in the aisle, they're not going to buy the cheapest thing because they're worried that it's going to break. When really we all know, like there's safety standards in place. Hopefully they stay in place that keep us all protected. And then I do think it is scary out there to think how much, anything can go on Instagram these days, anything can report to say what it does. So it really is up to the brand, and it does put a lot of onus on the consumer to really look into what they're buying. But I do think that's why brands do a lot of work to build trust with their consumers, to really be transparent. One thing for us was condoms have never had ingredients listed on them. Maybe you could dig deep on a website and find ingredients, but we put them always, not because we have to, but because we want to, on the packaging. Just feel like more transparency, the better.
Sure. I'll go next. When I started the business, I think women were really stuck with just like the classic drugstore types of products that have been on the shelf for decades. Very few of those products were formulated based on actual research. It was just, product development people in a lab being like, okay, this works. or it doesn't work because a lot of those products, ironically, for women's bodies can cause yeast infections, BV, endocrine disruption, microbiome disruption. And so for us, I was really focused on using the best available research at the time of innovation to put in ingredients that had proof points behind it, things that do support women's bodies. We make a combination of supplements and cosmetics, like our personal care products, like sit in a cosmetic category. And then we do have a medical device with our new anti-UTI spray, which is really cool. It has FDA clearance on it. Everything in this category actually is highly regulated. Consumers are like, oh, supplements, or like nobody is regulating supplements. Supplements are actually highly regulated by the FDA. And as a brand, and I think all the brands and founders on this panel can speak to, is that consumer trust is critical. And so testing your products for safety, for purity is really, really important. And we do that for every lot that comes through. That's just kind of like table stakes, if you are a brand that is in retail at this point. And then we're one of the only supplement brands that is performing clinical studies at the formula level on almost all of our products. So that's pretty cool and highly differentiated in the supplement space. You can get clinically studied ingredients in a lot of products, but they may not even be at the clinically studied dose, but that brand is still making claims from that clinical study, which is an FTC violation. So they're brands that don't do a great job, and they either don't know they're doing a great job, or they just choose to break the rules to get the customer because they're okay with making higher risk claims. And then there's brands like Love Wellness, and we choose to take a pretty neutral, lower risk approach to what we say in market, because I think we really want consumers to trust us.
Yeah, I think for us, it's that, we're Sephora clean, and we have to, for us, setting the standards around not only the categories that have been mentioned here, but also within devices, because there are a lot of plastic and porous devices that shouldn't be on the market that affect specifically women's health and internal health. So really trying to we design our devices in-house, and, really use high-grade silicone and think about our standards, what is the Maude standards, and then what do those standards mean for how we interact with the retailer. And the retailers are really, they're under a lot of scrutiny. So if we are compliant and are part of their clean programs, you can probably guarantee that now it's almost double the testing, or the sort of the reach on how we can make claims or what our formulations have to be, because they are very stringent. So I'm hoping that customers understand that within this category, especially to Whitney's point and to Lauren's point, they're often medical devices and or FDA approved products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We're dealing with very intimate, parts of the body, parts of our health with this. Yeah.
I will say there are a lot of products that are adjacent, call it intimate oils, that often people should not be putting inside their body. And I think there's too much leeway there, but my hope is that people will start to become more educated and read the back of the box, because it often says not to be used internally, even if on the front it sort of says it infers that.
Yeah, not to be used internally, or not to be used with condoms, maybe. Yeah, all kinds of things for sure. Well, and you touched on this a little bit at the beginning, I think all of you, but I do want to open up more space to it. Obviously, safety, efficacy is very important, but sometimes branding maybe gets a bad rap or is looked down upon as not as important. But all of you, have a strong background in branding, design, publicity. And I'd love to hear more, how important is, branding and the look of something to sexual wellness? Why is that an important topic?
I think it's everything. I think the fact that most brands in this category, including brands that are for women, are founded by men, number one. So in terms of the diversity of what you're, sort of the diversity of needs, the communication around the products, what they look like, what they're indicating around gender, all of these things are so critically important to your relationship with your own body, that I would say design is one of the most critical pieces of this category, and has been the thing that's cut through the noise and created any kind of change. Just design is everything. The product should be exceptional, and they should have standards to, that is table stakes, to Lauren's point, but design is the thing that really makes people start to understand things and really starts to create destigmatization and conversation for people. So it's kind of everything.
I totally agree with that so much. And I know Lauren touched on it also, but just like, I think the more stigma associated with a product, the more there has to be design because you have to really outweigh. So you make something feel good. Like our big mission, we were saying, like, we wanted people to be like, you want like STIs are the highest levels they've ever been right now between the ages of 15 to 24. You want young people to be using condoms. Well, maybe don't make them something that you're embarrassed to have out on your table. Like have it be something you want to take a picture with and feel good about. So I really think that design and branding just does so much. It's like even if you just want to have it in your cart and not have it covered up with other things. I mean, we know it from, I feel like tampons and that whole category had a big shift in understanding that. But yeah, I couldn't agree more that I think it's the design is integral. I know one thing too, like what we did with ours, like the green and the blue we have on our sort of central condoms was a very weird color palette to have. But when we looked into talked to young people and did all kinds of things, it was like sex was always actually one of these things that was like quite messy and fun and, like a little bit scary and awkward. And so we tried to reflect that in the branding. So sometimes it's about making something more beautiful with branding. And that's always important because beauty is important. But sometimes it's about reflecting back who somebody is and something that will help to utilize it.
Mm-hmm.
What I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, but for us speaking to couples, because people were not able to bring products together, like if they were getting highly gendered products in this space, specifically in the sexual wellness, sort of the big three categories that I mentioned before, it's very hard for then people to bring this to the table to talk to their partner. So, the shy by, getting coined shy by, like we always say share care, because we're like, this needs to be used by people and potentially their partners. How can you make this product inclusive? And so design leads that.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add, like just to echo Whitney.
Yeah. Well, and when it comes to, again, like the communicating how something is used, of course, branding design is very important. But I also want to talk about, just communicating like how it's used, how it's for. There's a lot of restrictions to that when you talk about like social media, for example, which again is obviously where a lot of young people are discovering products. For all of you, how are you working with or around those restrictions when it comes to talking about sex on these platforms?
It's rough.
Yeah.
We all know. The Center for Intimacy Justice is going to come out with their second study around what gets dinged on Meta and other platforms. And I'm sure the other founders here can speak to this as well. For female founded businesses and or female focused businesses, there are way more restrictions. Nobody's going to come out and tell you that from these platforms, but there are.
Yeah. We actually made a lubricant a couple of years ago and found that it was so challenging to put paid behind it because the platforms kept dinging your search terms and your keywords that we ultimately discontinued that product. And it was a like highly beloved product and people still email us and say, bring back sex stuff because that was the name of the lubricant. It's really, really challenging. I think also what's really interesting, like makes it a little more challenging when you have brand new innovation and you're trying to communicate what the product actually does, but you're going up against like FDA regulatory guidelines or the guidelines of the bigger platforms, because we're starting to even see like on Amazon that they are looking for like approved structure function claims and for things to be lower risk in general. And so it's a challenging environment. Even like in the early days, and even sometimes now, like we'll try to make like a retail fixture and like the word vagina on it, like will get flagged.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's tough.
It's terrible. Like it's absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
I genuinely thought when we started this, I remember like if you grew up in the 90s, it was like everything was yelling at you. Like governments were spending millions and millions on use a condom. It was like, it was just everywhere. And I thought there'd be all kinds of government grants coming out of everything. I thought you'd be able to promote, we did a campaign before we'd even really launched with use a condom. And we had a photo online of a guy wearing a t-shirt that all it said was use economy is blowing a bubble. And it's like, that is flagged as pornography. Like you can't go onto the website. I mean, all of us know it. So it's like talking to, it's agonizing. And I think too, what I'm most horrified by is just because of my age and demographic, what I'm mostly served on social too is plastic surgery and is like ways to fix myself from a cosmetic way, and to me, I find that to be like so damaging and horrifying. And then at the same time, you can't find things on there for sexual wellness or sexual health. It's just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our domain is blacklisted on Meta because of the devices, which look like literal paperweights. Yet we all, maybe we don't know this. I'm not sure if the audience knows this, but ED pills are fine and they can talk about sex. I understand like what I signed up for in sexual wellness and sort of the challenges, but there are certainly loopholes. And for any brand that has RX, they're able to advertise. They're also able to talk about pleasure if it's for men. And then brands that are not specifically, to your point, maybe they don't have lubricant, maybe they don't have devices, they're still censored, because if it's about vaginal health and anything related to women's health, it gets censored. And with AI kind of monitoring all of this, it's even worse because you can't really get to a person. I will put on the record, I've spoken to the chief revenue officer of Meta, and it's not going to change for a long time.
Yeah.
Great news, gals.
I mean, my whole thing is like, you want to leave money on the table, fine. Do we want to give money back to people that are going to restrict us? I'm not so sure. But ultimately, it's critically important for people to have, the microphone and the platform, and to be able to get information about their own health is like, it's asinine, to be honest.
Yeah. Next time, maybe we'll invite Meta to join this panel for next time and share their thoughts on this. Well, unfortunately, I mean, there's so much we could talk about this. I wish we could speak all day about this topic, but we do have to keep our event moving to our next panel. I just want to extend a huge thank you to Ava, Lauren, and Whitney. This is such an interesting conversation. Hopefully we'll have you all on Glossy again to speak about this.